On a brisk Friday in Anchorage, Alaska, the world watched as two of its most powerful leaders came together for a critical meeting. United States President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin met at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. This was their first face-to-face discussion during President Trump's second term in office. The main goal of this important summit was to find a way to end the long and difficult war in Ukraine. Hopes were high that the two leaders could find some common ground and begin a path towards peace after years of conflict that have deeply affected global stability and international relations. The meeting was planned to be a lengthy and detailed negotiation, with expectations of lasting up to 7 hours. The agenda was ambitious, aiming to cover complex issues from territorial disputes to future security guarantees for Ukraine. However, the summit did not go as planned. The discussions were cut short, concluding after just 3 hours. A second, larger session that was meant to include more officials from both sides was cancelled without a clear explanation. This sudden end to the talks hinted that the conversation was more challenging than many had anticipated, leaving observers to wonder what had gone wrong behind closed doors. The location of Alaska was chosen for its strategic position, situated between the United States and Russia. It provided a neutral, yet symbolic setting for such a high-stakes diplomatic effort. This was President Putin's first visit to the United States in a decade, a significant event in itself. The summit was arranged by the Kremlin just before a deadline set by President Trump. He had threatened to impose very severe new sanctions on Russia if it did not take steps to end the war. This created a sense of urgency and pressure, suggesting the meeting was a final attempt to avoid further economic penalties. The primary purpose of the gathering was to find a diplomatic solution to the war in Ukraine. Before the summit, President Trump had spoken about his ideas, which included media group, Trump speaking to press about proposals, maps of Ukraine and Russia on news screens at its docket at distribute_equally, discussing land swaps and security assurances for Ukraine that would not involve NATO membership. These ideas were controversial, especially for Ukraine, which has consistently refused to give up any of its territory. The stage was therefore set for a tense negotiation, with President Trump hoping his personal deal-making style could break the deadlock that had frustrated so many other international efforts to bring peace to the region. After the shortened meeting concluded, President Trump spoke to the press with a generally positive but very vague tone. He suggested that progress had been made, even though no formal agreement was announced. Many points were agreed to, and there are just a very few that are left, President Trump stated, adding, "We've made some headway." However, he did not provide any specific details about which points had been settled. Instead, he shifted the responsibility for the final steps towards peace onto Ukraine, telling reporters, "Now it is really up to President Zelensky to get it done," leaving many unsure of what to expect next. In stark contrast, President Vladimir Putin's comments showed no sign of compromise from Russia's firm position. He spoke about what he called fundamental threats to our security and insisted on the need to eliminate the primary causes of the conflict. This language is widely understood to refer to Russia's long-standing demands. These demands include Ukraine giving up territory, reducing its military, formally abandoning its goal of joining NATO, and making changes to its government. Putin's remarks suggested that Russia's core objectives in the war had not changed at all, despite the high-profile talks with the American president. One of the most notable moments came when President Putin publicly endorsed a claim made by President Trump. Putin confirmed that he agreed with Trump's assertion that the 2022 invasion of Ukraine would not have happened if Trump had been president at the time. Today, President Trump was saying that if he was president back then, there would be no war, and I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. "I can confirm that," Putin said. This statement highlighted the warm personal rapport between the two leaders, which was a central theme of their joint appearance. Later, in an interview on Fox News, President Trump continued to focus on his personal relationship with the Russian leader, rating the meeting a 10 based on their rapport. He offered few details about the diplomatic substance of the talks. Instead, he complimented President Putin and mentioned that Putin had told him the 2020 US election was rigged. This focus on personal chemistry over policy details left many foreign policy experts concerned. It raised questions about whether the summit had achieved any real progress or had simply been a platform for the two leaders to reinforce their own narratives. In Ukraine, the reaction to the Alaska summit was one of deep concern and disappointment. Officials in Kyiv watched the meeting closely, worried about what might be decided without their presence. Oleksandr Merezhko, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Ukrainian parliament, described the summit as a public relations victory for President Putin. He argued that the meeting helped to lift the Russian leader out of diplomatic isolation. He used Trump to show that he is not isolated, Merezhko explained, expressing a fear that the summit legitimized Putin on the world stage without producing any benefits for Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, who was not invited to the summit, had warned beforehand that Putin would try to deceive America. On the day of the meeting, he released a powerful video message to his people and the world. In it, he pointed out that even as the peace talks were happening in Alaska, Russia's military was continuing its attacks on Ukrainian cities and towns. This served as a stark reminder of the ongoing reality of the war. Another Ukrainian lawmaker, Oleksiy Honcharenko, suggested the inconclusive result simply meant that Putin had successfully bought himself more time to continue the conflict. Meanwhile, in Russia, the summit was presented as a major triumph. Russian state media outlets repeatedly broadcast footage of the joint appearance between President Trump and President Putin. The coverage heavily emphasized the warm and friendly chemistry between the two leaders. The narrative pushed by the Kremlin was that the meeting was a significant breakthrough. Commentators and politicians framed it as an opportunity for Putin to explain Russia's position directly to an American president who was willing to listen, unlike his predecessors. This portrayal aimed to boost Putin's image at home as a strong and effective world leader. Russian officials echoed this triumphant tone. Andrei Gurylyov, a prominent member of the Russian parliament and a well-known political commentator, called the meeting a breakthrough. He argued that the most important outcome was that President Putin was able to clarify the reasons for the war directly to President Trump. Gurylyov stated that the summit proved the Kremlin's position was unwavering, and that Russia would not back down from its goals. For Moscow, the meeting was a success simply because it happened, demonstrating that Russia remains a key player that the United States must engage with directly, regardless of the ongoing conflict. The most significant outcome of the Trump-Putin summit was that it ended without any declared agreement or deal. The failure to produce a joint statement or a clear path forward has left the future of the Ukraine conflict shrouded in uncertainty. The abrupt end to the talks suggests that the differences between the two sides remain vast and perhaps insurmountable at this time. With no deal in place, the immediate question is whether President Trump will follow through on his threat to impose the severe sanctions on Russia that he had warned about before the meeting took place. The lack of a resolution also raises the possibility that the summit was a stalling tactic by the Kremlin. By engaging in high-level talks, Russia may have been trying to delay the imposition of new sanctions and buy more time for its military operations in Ukraine. The inconclusive result means the war is likely to continue without any change in its intensity. For the people of Ukraine, this means more fighting and suffering. For the international community, it means the ongoing challenge of managing a major European conflict with no clear end in sight. Looking ahead, the next steps are unclear. President Putin extended an invitation to President Trump for their next meeting to be held in Moscow. President Trump's response was non-committal but open. Ooh, that's an interesting one. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening, he remarked. The prospect of an American president visiting Moscow while Russia is at war with a U.S. partner would be highly controversial. It would certainly create significant political pressure on President Trump both at home and from allied nations in Europe. Ultimately, the Alaska summit matters because it highlights the complex and often personal nature of modern diplomacy. It showed that while a good personal relationship between leaders can open doors for communication, it cannot easily solve deep-rooted geopolitical conflicts. The meeting ended without a deal, leaving Ukraine in a precarious position and the world waiting to see what will happen next. The war continues, the sanctions deadline looms, and the path to peace remains as elusive as ever, defined by the unpredictable actions of two of the world's most powerful men.